So, I have a 2020 Lincoln Aviator, and I've got a growling, rumbling, what I call Hydrodyne Oscillation noise coming from the rear end to the driver's side rear. Not sure if it's the bearing or the CV half shaft axle. But either way, it's definitely coming from this noise. It doesn't happen in reverse. It's not the tyre. We put a DTI on the tyre and the wheel, and they're perfect. I've even had these match balanced with the tyres, new tyres, because the old tyres, Toyos, that were on here, put on by the dealer where I bought this from, brand new set of Toyo Celsius. They, for want of a better word, very, very noisy. 3 of them were out of round, so much so that they couldn't even balance them on the dynamic balancer, the loading dynamic balancer. I think it's called the Hunter Elite. It was 54 pounds out. It wouldn't even balance it. So 3 of those tyres have been replaced under warranty. I had to buy another one. I put a set of Mission Primacy all season tyres on it. Still not that quiet, and I think it's just because there's not much tyre and a 22-inch wheel. But there's a lot of sound deadening on this car, but you can still hear this growling, this rumbling coming through. Now, there's no play in this wheel whatsoever. There's no noise coming from the bearing. You can't hear anything. No clicking, no rumbling, no rattling, no grinding. But it's definitely coming from this side of the vehicle. So first of all, drive shafts and wheel bearings are going to be replaced on this. Let's see what fun we have, because they put a steel bearing housing in an aluminum casting, or aluminium casting as we like to call it. And everything I've seen so far, there's nothing on the Aviator being replaced, but it's the same as the 2020, 2024 Explorers. The STs are exactly the same. It just doesn't have the air suspension, air ride suspension on the Explorers that this one does. But this housing at the back and the cage, they just corrode in there, and I've seen people on YouTube just smashing the hell out of these things, and it just scares me. So let's see what this brings us and take it from there. By the way, 150 foot-pounds is the torque on these wheel nuts. A little bit excessive, but that's what Ford designed them to be, and these wheels are heavy, real heavy. So what have we got? Handy dandy little like this, Harbour Freight, there you go. And I'm not sponsored by Harbour Freight in any way, shape or form. Let's see what we got in here. I can't feel, even when I was underneath here looking at this drive shaft, I couldn't feel any play in it except for the play in the backlash that you normally find in these types of system design. I can't feel anything in this bearing whatsoever. So we're just going to pull it apart. If it doesn't fix it, well, and it's back down to the differential. These have got e-brakes on them. Let's get some spanners. Okay, back with an assortment of tools. Put out plastic clips. There we go. And then an 8mm for the speed sensor. An 8mm for the bracket that holds the brake line on. I'm going to probably end up taking this whole axle assembly off, because if this bearing doesn't come out straight away, I'm not going to start hammering on this. I'm going to take it all off and put it on the press and push it out. I don't believe in hammering the hell out of castings, because you can fracture them. So the brake is as I was saying, there's two 18mm bolts that hold this complete brake caliper on. There's one. What's looking good so far is the fact that they're breaking loose very easy, which means they're not corroded. I'm hoping they're not corroded. And I can take them out with my fingers. Let's set it up there for a minute. A block of wood. Let's set this caliper on. You don't have to take this off, you can hang the caliper, but I want a bit of space, and it doesn't take but a few minutes. This is a connection for the raw speed sensor and the e-brake, which they just happened to bolt to this bracket. That's unusual, they bolted it. Normally they just put plastic clips. Well, in this one they put a plastic clip and a bolt. Okay, now my brake caliper can go and sit down there. This one can come and sit up out of the way, and I'm not going to damage it. Let's get a high face hammer. Here's the other thing I don't like. A pet peeve of mine, I see guys whacking the hell out of these with a 5-pound mallet. They're inevitably breaking off. This is a casting and they're going to be breaking these. So sounds like it's free. There you go. Another bit of promising news. You don't have to whack the hell out of it. Now again, the bolts are 18mm that hold these wheel bearings in. Oh, that's interesting. You don't have a lot of clearance in here. lost my short 18mm 1/2 inch. So we'll loosen it and then take the 3/8 socket, ratchet, and take those bearing bolts out. One thing you have to do first is push that drive shaft back, because the bolts won't come out with the drive shaft in. Pretty warm, pretty noisy. Hide face. So you can get those out now. Remember I said I was going to take these out. Just going to go ahead and do that. It's not very tight. I'm not torque specs for these. So, apologies, I didn't video the dismantling of this because I ran into a few obstacles and I was trial and error. But I sort of semi-reassembled it to give you an idea of how I found the best way to take this apart and get that bearing out there without, as I say, putting a slider hammer on here and just whacking the hell out of this, which there's a couple of videos out there, guys, are taking hours and hours. So this took me an hour. And this bearing is pretty well corroded. And what happens, you've got aluminum casting, steel, iron casing, and you get the similar metal, so you're going to get salt sitting in here. And you get electrolytic corrosion happening, and that just seizes in there. And I've seen people heating these things up. I don't agree with that, because basically you're heating this up, which is expanding this, which is making it tighter. You need to heat the casting up to get the casting to expand slightly. I wouldn't put too much heat on these castings. My personal preference. You'll find other mechanics and other techs will do things differently, but what I found, there's 5 bolts and, well, there's 4 bolts and 1 nut. There's one. Okay, so here's a better picture of what we're looking at here. Upper radius arm, control arm, you've got an 18mm bolt, nut I should say, on this bolt, it goes all the way through. You've got another 18mm on this control arm. You've got a 27mm and a 24mm on this bolt that goes all the way through, and it goes through and connects to the lower radius arm either side. And then you've got the 1 bolt, or nut I should say, for the shock absorber, and underneath on the lower control arm you have another 18mm. So once you get those out, this whole knuckle with the bearing will come out. Now the reason I mentioned earlier is that I ran into a few issues. This lower bolt on the back of this casting, when the drive shaft is in, this lower bolt down here, you can't get a socket on it because of this tube. So the best thing I found was to leave the bolts, all 4 bolts, holding the wheel bearing, leave them in. Don't need to take them out. Certainly don't waste time and struggle. You can get to 3 of these bolts, but accessibility isn't great, but you can get to them. Don't waste time. Leave the bearing in. Take this hub assembly, take it off completely. And when you dismantle all this, it actually is very easy to get this bearing out. So you take these bolts out. Let's say I've temporarily put this back together so you can get an idea. This comes out. This lower bolt comes out, and obviously it's got a high torque on this lower bolt. That's what you have. Yep, pick it up in a minute. You've got a lower control arm through a bush. That bolt comes out. You've got this upper radius arm, control arm for another bush. Take the shock absorber bolt out, nuts. It's not a bolt, it's actually a taper on the bottom of the shock absorber. Shock absorber comes out. This top arm comes out, and this then is free. And what you're going to have this bearing sitting in here, and you can put it on a bench. And when you've got it on the bench, you can support underneath here, all around, and then use a 5 pound, I used a 5 pound club hammer to start knocking that out of there. I heated this up very lightly with a low temp torch, and it took me about 10 minutes to get that out of there. Quite a bit of hitting, but at least I'm not damaging all the bushes and everything else on here. And I say, to get to this stage, hour and a half where that bearing was out, and I was able to clean this up, clean the corrosion out of here, put some aluminum primer. That's what you're seeing there at the moment, white aluminum primer, to try and stave off the corrosion, so if anybody ever changes his bearing again, they'll have an easier time. 75,000 miles, and to say, when this was fully assembled, I couldn't find anything wrong. I couldn't feel anything. But when I finally got it out, and by the way, when you do take this out, that drive shaft, if you want to replace it, just a couple of hard pulls on the drive shaft and it comes out. There's only a C-clip piece of metal holding it in. But anyway, when I did finally get this off, I could feel it, and you could gently hear this creaking noise that was coming from this bearing. Obviously it's not doing it now because I've whacked the hell out of the back of this bearing to push it out the casing. And then I pulled the rear seal off to see what was in there, and there is some corrosion in there, so water has got in here and it's caused this bearing to deteriorate. So 75,000 miles. From what I'm seeing, these bearings, 25, 30, 40, they don't last. I mean, when I used to work for Ford and design, in Ford of Europe and Ford North America, our design was, the specification was 150,000 mile, 10 year. I'm not sure what they've done now. I was at Boeing for 18 years after that. My last truck was the F-150 that I was working on in the systems engineering. 150,000 10 miles was the standard durability test that these parts had to go through. I'm seeing so many of these bearings online that are failing prematurely, very early. Whether or not that's the specification that they've laxed to increase revenue for service, or whether or not it's just bad workmanship in the supplier. NSK, I'm reading, was the OEM supplier for these, although I can't verify that. It's just something that I read. Motorcraft, Ford Motor Co. I don't know who makes the parts for them, but it did seem to indicate it was NSK. Anyway, I bought some more NSK bearings to put them on. I'm just waiting for them. And I will show you the reassembly when it goes back in, but it's not such a daunting task once you get these 4 bolts nuts and bolts and one nut off for the shock absorber. You can see this taper here. Once you've got those off, it's quite a simple job. As I say, you're free to put this one on the bench and work on it without overly exerting damage to any of these bearings, any of these bushes, any of this frame, potentially cracking them. That's my motto. I'm not going to start banging the hell out of this while it's in the vehicle. So take it out, put it on the bench, gives you far more room to see what you're doing and a lot easier. So here's the knuckle on the bench. Corrosion's cleaned out, aluminum primer. Here is the new NSK bearing. A whole lot better than the old one that came out there, that's for sure. The part number of this NSK bearing is 73BWK-H05. This comes from Parts Geek online. I'm going to put anti-seize around this bearing. Probably not going to do too much, but at least give it a little bit of protection, hopefully. Just giving it a thin coat of anti-seize around here. It might help in the future. Hopefully one never has to replace this bearing again. And on the nuts, full disclosure, the manual, I did buy the Aviator Workshop service manual for this, which actually ends up being the Ford Lincoln one, which is very good. Very pleased with it. The manual does say discard these bolts. Yeah, I've given them a hefty dose of blue Loctite, thread number 42. So the bearing goes in one way. There we go. And the bolts. Now these bolts are the same bolts that's in the front wheel bearings, and the front wheel bearings are done up to 66 foot-pounds. The rear wheel bearings are done up to 111 foot-pounds, and you're supposed to tighten them diagonally. I'm sure the bearing pulls down equally, but this isn't tightened here, which is good. So I'm going to tighten these up, and that'll be this part done. So let's torque these up, put it flat on the bench. That's 111 foot-pounds. So nicely torqued. This feels so much nicer than the old one. Should get rid of my Hydrodyne Oscillation, my growling, humming, buzzing, whatever you want to term you want to use on this. There we go. Let's get it put back in the car now, new drive shaft. So here we have the new CV shaft, direct from Ford. Had to order it. It's only overnight actually, it came in great. I live in Idaho. This came from Portland and I got it at the 11 o'clock this morning. I'm going to grease these splines up and insert that. Here's my new bolts. They're all Nylox. That's why they say they're one-time use only. So considering I'm putting the new, splurging out for the new drive shaft at considerable cost, $302 plus 6% tax. So let's get this put in now. Okay, so I hope you can see this. There we go. That's what it. Couple of big shoves, and it lets the C-clip compress and go in to the retaining slot or the groove that's inside there. So there's the drive shaft in. That's all it takes. Let's rest that there for a moment, and then we'll start putting this knuckle assembly back together. Here's the knuckle assembly with the bearing installed. What we're going to do, going to grease this spline up. Just as an added note, there's been a few complaints about ticking noise when you put on the Explorers, not on this one, but it's the same. There's a couple of YouTube channels. There's one out there that shows this ticking noise, and it's on a police interceptor, which happens to be the same as this. And there's complaints about ticking noise when you first put it into drive and then reverse and then drive. It clicks, and what it is, it's these splines that are clicking inside the wheel bearing hub, making this clicking noise. So as a matter of fact, I've always greased these up when I put them back in here, because you get water in here and it starts to corrode. But they seem to find that to get rid of this clicking noise, their solution was to come in here and grease these. What would you know? And I believe the TSB that's come out, or in the process of coming out from my understanding, is to grease these. So just as a tidbit, there you go, lots of tidbits. If you're doing this, grease this spline. Let's get this put back together now. So here's a bearing. Get that started into the hub, the drive shaft. Shock absorber in the bottom. You know, new shock absorber nut. These are the two 18mm nuts for the control arms, upper and the side one. is get this to road drive height before you torque up any of these bushes, because you want the bushes in the right place. You don't want the bushes twisted in this situation. If you tighten them up, when it goes down, the bushes will twist slightly, and that's not what you're after. So what I'm going to do is let the hoist down, get it onto the other 3 wheels, and then leave the jack under this side too. That's all the arms back in. Head nut bolt LB5Z3B477-A. New one. This okay, bear with me. I'm gonna get this jacked up correctly. Okay, so we've got the weight back on here, and we're going to torque up these links and bushes now. Okay, here we go. Torque wrench, shock absorber nut, 59 foot-pounds. These upper link arm nuts, 76 foot-pounds. This main bolt that goes through to the lower radius arm, 258 foot-pounds. The lower knuckle link, 129 foot-pounds. The hub axle bolt nut, the hub axle nut, 221 foot-pounds. So, set it at 76. I also need to go and get my bigger torque wrench. Okay, let's get this torqued up. 18 mil. Just snug them up for now. You wonder when that noise is, the engine's running, because I need to get the air suspension to where I wanted it to be. $59 on that. Let's get these snugged up, shall we? 21. Yep, 21 rating. I like the fact that the bolt is spinning, which means it's not binding. These upper ones, 76 foot-pounds. One. Two. So we've already done that one. Shock absorber the 59. We've just got to set this one at now 258. Let's get my other torque wrench for that. $258. Yeah, you witness to that. That's a lot of torque on that bolt. Nevertheless, so the shield's back on, all the bolts are tightened, so the torques, as I've mentioned. Let's get the brake caliper put back on. Some Loctite on these nuts. Okay. When you put this caliper back on, make sure this brake hose isn't twisted. When you're putting this or tightening these nuts up, be careful. This e-brake controller is plastic. If you got a bit overzealous, you're likely to get your wrench and hit the plastic and could break the connector. So just be careful. On the other end, there we go. One 66 foot-pounds. toot. Connect the bracket, 8mm. Speed sensor. Take it easy with the speed sensors, they are fragile, and as the plastic gets older it tends to get very brittle. Clearance all around. Let's torque this one up to, you remember what it was? 221 foot-pounds. I've got it pretty tight. There we go. Now we need to do make sure we've got no spare nuts and bolts left, and the only thing we should have left is 5 lug nuts. Do a quick visual, shall we? The e-brake's connected, speed sensor is connected, the fir tree is in, fir tree here, connector's in, this 10mm is done up, this one we know is torqued. The radius arm, upper radius arm, upper control link is torqued. The 27mm bolt is torqued to 258 foot-pounds. The lower radius arm, link, tie link, is torqued up. The shock absorber, which is there, is torqued up. The brake caliper, bolts, 2 of them, one here and one down the bottom, both 66 foot-pounds. I think we're ready to put the wheel back on. What say you? Let's try that, shall we? So 150 foot-pounds on these lug nuts, which is the max this torque wrench goes to. I'm only snugging them down. Let's take the weight off. Okay, so 150 foot-pounds on these. Okay. Take it for a test drive, see what it rides like, shall we? See if it's fixed the problem.